Missed an episode of your favorite podcast? Choose from over a decade of content in our archives, not just the latest episode. All free at gcnlive.com.
This is your call to action. Get prepared, America. Economy, survival, energy, disasters. This is USAPrepares.com. Informative radio, educational radio. Interact now by emailing instructor@USAPrepares.com or text at 434-390-7953. Class, please take your seats. Now, your instructor, Vincent Finelli.
Everyone all set? Cocked? Locked? Here we go. Your dial set correctly to USA Prepares. I'm Vincent Finelli. And just three of us in the studio today, me and a couple of Colts. And it looks like Dr. Shealy is on the road. So it's just me. And I will be sharing with you some tips and things that I do here at the farm that may be a little different from what others may do. Alex is engineering the broadcast in Minnesota. And if you feel like being on the air with me, that's pretty easy. All you have to do is dial this number, 866-582-9933, 866-582-9933. The telephone listen line is up, 605-477-3249. Alex will be glad to answer the phone and put you in the queue. I will see the queue right here in the studio at the farm in Missouri, and it shows me all the telephone lines. It shows me when someone is called, and it even will give me your first name and where you're calling from. And the reason it does that is Alex will say to you, welcome, this is USA Prepares. May I have your first name, where you're calling from, state? And he may even say, can you share with me the topic? And the reason he does that is so that I know. Not that he's call screening, but let's say you want to talk about something that is way off topic. Well, it might not be appropriate for the instructor who has spent time preparing for the broadcast to be talking about something else. And I may send Alex back a message saying, feel free to call in another time, but today's not a good day for that particular topic. That almost never happens. What does happen is it just gives me a little bit of a head up that if we're talking about geoengineering, climate engineering, and I see that you'd like to talk about climate engineering, that's great. It works out very, very well. So that's what that's for. It's really not to prevent people from calling. Okay, so since it's just you and me today, I'd like to share with you a couple of thoughts. When we travel in our vehicles, whether it be a passenger car or a light truck, we bring some tools with us. And one of the tools that I suggest you consider buying is offered for sale by Harbor Freight Tools, the company that I call the Chinese factory tool outlet. Everything they have in there is Chinese, as far as I can tell. I haven't seen anything that's made in America. But you really don't have a lot of choices, because if you decide to buy Craftsman tools, many of them, not all of them, but many of them are from China anyway. Well, Harbor Freight is at least half price or a third of the price of what you might find Craftsman tools for. Even when Craftsman tools are on sale, they're more expensive than Harbor Freight tools. And some of Harbor Freight's tools are just really top quality. Yeah, you heard me say that. One of the things that we carry with us is a breaker bar. Now, a breaker bar is a long rod, and it will drive a socket. So you can put a standard half-inch socket on a breaker bar and carry that with you. Now, what would you want to do that for? Well, let's say you want to change your tire. And let's say you had your wheels put on. You have a flat. And you've had your wheels put on by some guy at the tire shop. And he uses an impact gun. And he torques those wheels to 150 foot-pounds. Ladies, I've got to tell you that it's tough to get those lug nuts off, or lug bolts, depending on what you have. So if you have a 25-inch breaker bar, you'll have a lot more leverage in order to loosen those lug nuts. Now, it's important that you learn how to change your tire. I'd say in the next few days, you should learn how to do that. I'd say it's not raining, not snowing, not sleeting. The weather's nice. Get out there and, read the manual on how to change your tire. Guys, too. If you've never done it, well, that AAA may not be available. They may be delayed. So you really need to learn how to do that. And you want to make sure that your tire in your vehicle has plenty of air in it, the right amount of air. I got to tell you that, in our shop, we see a lot of vehicles come in here. And one of the things that our son does when he services a vehicle is he checks the spare tire for the right amount of air pressure. Almost always, vehicles come in here with tires that have almost no air in the spare. How can that be? Well, we don't worry about the spares. As a matter of fact, you'll find out that you might have a 15-year-old vehicle with a 15-year-old spare, if you have a spare. Not all vehicles even have spares. So you might want to check the inflation pressure, because the last thing you want to do is be stranded on the road. Get those lug nuts off, get that spare tire out, and find out it's flat. Okay, and how much air can you put in the spare tire? Well, if you read the sidewall of the tire, it will say the load capacity right on the sidewall of the tire at a specific inflation pressure. So it may say X number of pounds load at 32 pounds per square inch, 35 pounds, 44, 51, 80, 100, 120. So read what it says and do not exceed the pressure that the tire manufacturer says is the maximum inflation pressure. Okay, so back to this breaker bar. So it's 25 inches long. How much does it cost? $8.99 when it's on sale. $8.99. So it's a little over 2 feet long. It's very heavy steel. It's chrome plated. It's really tough. We've never broken one. And we have them in all of our vehicles. There's another thing you can use that breaker bar for. Let's say you are looking at a guy that just looks mean, and it looks like there's going to be a problem with him. Well, that breaker bar is a little tool to kind of help even up the score, in case you need to use it. So, one more reason to have one of those breaker bars. The Christmas season is coming. People feel forced to exchange gifts. And for $8.99 plus taxes in your area, for probably less than $10, you can have something that is useful and will last a couple of lifetimes. So that's a Harbor Freight half-inch drive breaker bar. Now, they come in 18 inches as well. I suggest you get the 25-inch one because it gives you more leverage if you're going to be taking this with you. We have several of them in our toolbox in our shop, and we have one in each vehicle. And you might want to find the right socket to go with that. If your car is a European car, it's going to be a metric size socket. Or if it's an Asian car, it'll be metric. If it's an American car, it might be metric, and it might be SAE, Society of Automotive Engineers, in 16ths of an inch. So how much do the sockets cost? Well, you can probably get the socket in a set from the Chinese factory tool outlet for less than $10. So now you're talking about $20 for the breaker bar and a set of sockets. Now make sure the sockets that you buy are the same drive size as the breaker bar. So you can find sockets in 3/8 inch drive and half-inch drive. Yeah, actually, they make it even bigger than that, and I don't want to confuse you. So half-inch is what you need, in my opinion, for the lug nuts and lug bolts. Let's talk about surge protection. Let's say you are concerned about lightning. Let's say you're concerned about a CME, coronal mass ejection. Let's say you want to protect your house quickly and inexpensively. Here's what you do. Let me tell you the story that goes behind it first. Back in the 1980s, I was involved in computer design. for large banking operations. And I wanted to have the best surge protection and the best uninterruptible power systems that I could get, considering value. Okay, what would be the best bang for the buck, if you will? So I did some research, and there are a number of companies that offered surge protection. One was called BEST, B-E-S-T, another was called APC, American Power Conversion, and there are others. Triplite, T-R-I-P-P-L-I-T-E, I believe is how they spell it. And what I did was I really liked APC, American Power Conversion. And by the way, that's what we have here at the farm. So I called the corporate headquarters of American Power Conversion, and I asked to speak to an engineer. And I said, so I'm interested in surge protection, but I've got a question. Let's say you have the breaker panel, and then you have 10 outlets strung one after the next, after the next, after the next, after the next. I know that if you put your surge protector into any one of those outlets, if it's grounded properly, wired properly, and then you plug your computer device in it, if a surge comes through, a surge is too much power. If a surge comes through that circuit into the outlet, into the surge protector will stop the surge from, most of the surge, from going to the equipment. It will attenuate the extra voltage, which is what a surge is, too much voltage. So American Power Conversion surge protection is typically rated at 330 volts, which is roughly 3 times the voltage that you would receive out of a 120 volt outlet. So if you have a spike, a real quick pulse of too much voltage, the surge protector will attenuate it. If you have too much current being drawn through the surge protector, there's a circuit breaker that will open up and prevent further electricity from going through the surge protector. Well, my question, and I understood that. That's pretty simple, right? Well, my question was this. Let's say you have a surge protector on the 10th outlet in the string from that particular circuit breaker. So you have the surge protector on an outlet that is not the outlet that's being used by the device that you want to protect. Will it protect it? Yeah, just me today. And I'm just giving you a few tips of what I do, the way I do things, why I do things the way I do, and some things that I've learned, in my over 60 years of hitting my thumb with a hammer. So, about this surge protection, I mentioned that surge protection, if you have American Power Conversion surge protection, it will protect your equipment typically by not letting more than 330 volts come through that surge protector to your equipment. That is typically rated to use 120 volts. Well, how do you find out? If you turn over the unit on the back, it'll either be a label on there of some kind, or you will be able to read in the plastic. It'll be debossed or embossed, and it'll say L-N, L-G, G-N, and a number, followed by the letter V. So, for example, what that means is there are 3 wires in your electrical outlet. There's a line, a neutral, and a ground. So it'll say something like L-N, meaning between the line and the neutral, then a number like 330 V for volts. So that surge protector is rated to suppress or attenuate any voltage greater than 330. So what you're looking for is 3 surge protectors within that strip. Line to neutral, line to ground, and ground neutral. You want all 3 protected. And the good ones will typically attenuate 330 volts. Now, it can't attenuate much less than that, because if it does, it'll create a short circuit all the time. And it'll blow out really quickly. So the idea is they'll let a spike come through, which is a momentary amount of voltage that's too much, up to 330 volts. Some of these surge protectors are rated at 400 volts. That's about the absolute maximum I would want to see. So about that outlet, so you've got your circuit breaker panel and then your first outlet. Then daisy chain to your first outlet is your second, then to your third, then to your fourth, and so on. So what happens if you have equipment, let's say a television, plugged into that circuit, but not plugged into the surge protection device? So, for example, let's say you've got your surge protector on outlet number 1, closest to the breaker panel, and your TV is on outlet number 10 of that same circuit. Will that surge protection, which is ahead of your television, will it protect your television? The answer is yes, but not as well as if it's plugged in, if your TV is plugged into the surge protector directly. How much is the delta or the difference? About 75 volts. So in the case of a 330 volt surge protector, that TV might receive 405 volts, which is 330 plus 75 volts. So it'll work, but not as well. So that brings me to the next point. Let's say you want to have surge protection on the cheap for your whole house. How do you do it? Without having an electrician come in or without rewiring. Well, here's what you do. You get one of those surge protectors that I mentioned at, let's say, a 330 volt model that has line to neutral, line to ground, and ground to neutral, rated at 330 volts, and you plug it in to the nearest outlet electrically, cable feet, if you will, to your breaker panel. So now you have a surge protector which is really close to your breaker panel, and it will attenuate on that circuit, actually on the whole panel, almost all of the surges that come through for the rest of the house. The only problem is there are two sides to your electrical panel. One is considered red, the other is considered black, and then the aluminum conductor in the middle would be called a common. So what you really need to do is find two circuits that are real close to the breaker panel, one on each side of the 220 or the 240, and plug one surge protector into each. That'll do it. So it's just me today for hour number 1. Kyle's going to be joining us for hour number 2, and I've been talking about surge protection for your whole house, doing it frugally. And when I lived in Virginia, the house, we bought a used farmhouse, and it was built in the 1980s, but it did not have whole house surge protection, and we had really spotty electricity. We didn't have a off-grid system back then. So the computers were always having problems because the power would flicker. You know, we'd have what's called a brownout, a lot of brownouts, brownout is not enough voltage. So the typical voltage, if you were to take a voltmeter and plug the probes into your receptacle, you'd probably find it somewhere 127, 126, 125 volts. If you're at the end of the line, meaning you're the last family or the last house at the end of the power line in your area, you might find it 114 volts, 113, something like that, which is really tough for motors to start. If you've got a higher voltage, electric motors like compressors will start much better, air conditioning units, refrigerators, and so forth. But if you have a lot of voltage, it burns out light bulbs really fast. So it's a double-edged sword. So the bottom line on surge protection is we had this house and it did not have whole house surge protection. So what I did was I opened up the breaker panel. Now don't do this. If you don't know what you're doing, don't do this. Please, because you can electrocute yourself. But what you can do is you can read up on it. There are plenty of articles on the internet and YouTube on on how circuit breaker panels work. And you'd shut off the power to your house with the main breaker. And assuming it's wired properly, it'd be pretty safe to do this. Pretty safe, not completely safe, but pretty safe. And you only use one hand. The reason for that is you don't put both hands inside the circuit breaker panel because you can electrocute yourself from, let's say, your left hand touching the case, if you will, or the chassis of the breaker panel, and your right hand with a screwdriver touching the metal part of the screwdriver and a circuit breaker that's energized. So what happens is the electricity will go from one hand across your chest where your heart is to the other hand. So typically what electricians try to do is use just one hand. And you don't want to wear flip-flops. You want to wear rubber-soled shoes. Leather's not so good because it conducts moisture and so through the concrete floor, if you happen to be on concrete floor in the basement, you can have not a really good ground, but a partial ground, and you can electrocute yourself through your leather-soled shoes. So sneakers might be a good choice. Okay, so what I did in this farmhouse in Virginia was open up the breaker panel and screw in two outlets, two separate boxes, single gang boxes, with a receptacle in each one. And one of them with 12 gauge wire, which is Romex, 20 amp wire. I wired that in with the ground, the white wire and the black wire, to one of the hot sides of the 240 volt breaker, to one of the 240 volt breakers, or one side, I should say. And then I did the same thing and wired in another receptacle with another piece of Romex to the other side. So the way to think of it is you have three colors in your breaker box. One would be red or a red stripe. The other would be black, and then the other would be the common. So you want to run from the red side to the common and another wire from the black side and the common. And that will protect both legs of the 240 volts. And that will give you the protection that you are pursuing. And then what you do is, once you have these outlets in place, then you plug in your surge protector, one surge protector in each one. And that will really reduce the chances of you blowing up equipment in your house, the entire house. That means the refrigerator and the freezer and the air conditioning unit and the heating system, which it probably has a computer control, and the microwave oven, which is computer controlled, and the dishwasher, which is computer controlled, and the coffee maker, which is computer controlled, on and on and on. Okay? So those are my thoughts on how to do that. And if any of you wants further instruction, you can call. You can call us right here on the air, and that number is 866-582-9933. 866-582-9933. Let's say you don't want to do it that way. Let's say you're willing to spend $100. You can get a circuit breaker. It's a two-space circuit breaker. And you can install that circuit breaker with a ground wire inside the circuit breaker panel. Now, you've got to make sure that you've got the right surge protector circuit breaker for your panel, because there are all kinds of sizes and shapes of circuit breakers. The one I like best is called a BR. BR. And it's the General Electric style. Sometimes you'll find them in a Siemens box, electrical breaker box, sometimes in an Eaton, E-A-T-O-N, but it's the General Electric style, BR. That's my favorite one. It's the least expensive. I think it's got pretty good connections, and those are the ones that we have standardized on in our farmhouse. So you can buy a BR breaker that has surge protection built in, and all you do is insert that into your circuit breaker panel, connect the ground wire, and you're done. It's as simple as that. It's a little more expensive. It's going to cost close to $100 to do that. There are other circuit breaker styles, but you'll have to research which is which to fit your panel. It's another way of doing it, which is a box with several wires, typically three wires. and you hang that on the side of your breaker panel. And that would be a whole house surge protection device. And they can cost between $100 and $200, so more expensive. So just a thought if you want to add surge protection to your whole house. Now, what have we done? Well, we have a main breaker panel with surge protection. Then we have sub-panels. And a sub-panel is just like a main breaker box except smaller. And it's electrically connected to the main breaker panel. So what we do is we have whole house surge protection on the main breaker panel, and then each sub-panel off that, of which there are probably 5, has additional sub-panel surge protection. And the idea is we absolutely positively don't want our equipment being blown up by lightning strikes. And if you live in a farm area, there are plenty of lightning strikes. As a matter of fact, this is just my theory, and I can't prove this, but I think if you live in a city, you're less prone to surges than we are. And I believe the reason is there are so many electrical grounds. So if you live in a neighborhood and you're tightly packed in there, you have a ground rod into your soil, your neighbor has one, their neighbor has one, and so forth. And there's so many grounds to absorb the lightning strike that each house, if you will, gets less of the lightning strike than we would out here where we're all alone. If lightning strikes here, we get the full brunt of that lightning strike. Whereas if you've got 300 homes, you each get 1/300th of that lightning strike. And I think that's why lightning is so damaging when you live in the country compared to when you live in the city. So that's my thought on that. I can't prove it, but I think that's true. Got another thought for you about refrigerator and freezer casters or wheels. When we built our house in 2005, we bought appliances that would fit in the kitchen, and we designed the kitchen cabinets around them. So we bought a 100% freezer and a 100% refrigerator. So instead of having a refrigerator in the kitchen and a freezer in the basement or a freezer in the garage, we thought, why would we do that? Why don't we, if we're going to buy a refrigerator anyway, let's buy one that's all refrigerator. So it's about 17 cubic feet. And then right next to it, in the kitchen, is the freezer. And one of them is a left-hand door, one of them is a right-hand door, so the door handles meet in the middle. So it actually looks kind of like one of those Sub-Zero machines, but it's not. It's just a Frigidaire. And sometimes Whirlpool makes them. We wanted a Whirlpool, but they discontinued the model when we were, after we ordered it, they discontinued it. So we couldn't get that. So we went for Plan B, which was Frigidaire, which is okay. It's not great. It's just okay. So the problem with that is the appliance manufacturers have been looking for, actually probably the accountants who work for the appliance manufacturers trying to get a raise, saying, you know what, we can take stuff off. We don't need to make the door liners as thick. So we can thin out the plastic so we can use less plastic. We can take the wheels off the bottom of the refrigerator and the freezer. So we don't need to roll the thing around, just put it in place. And when it quits in 5, 6, 7 years, the owner will throw it away and buy a new one. They don't need to roll it out and vacuum the dust out from behind it. So there's no wheels on them now, which is nuts. Well, for about $15 or $16, you can go on eBay or search for wheels or casters for your refrigerator. And they're strips. They're about 3 or 4 inches wide. They're the length or the depth of your refrigerator. And there's a whole bunch of wheels. And they only go in one direction, forward or backward. So I bought a bunch of them. We've got a refrigerator and a freezer in the kitchen. We have another one in another location. And the problem is, if you want to get behind it, you can't, because most refrigerators and freezers don't have wheels. So I bought these, and I put one set under each appliance. So there's 2 sets of these wheels for the refrigerator. I'm sorry, 2, I wouldn't say sets. I would. two sets of wheels for the left side and right side of the refrigerator, and then for the freezer, and then the one in the other location. Let's say the garage, for example. And the idea is you can roll out your refrigerator without taking everything out of it and vacuum out the coils in the back. So your refrigerator runs cooler and is more efficient. And that's important to me. And you might want to do that, roll that out twice a year. But you can't do it if you don't have wheels, which means you have to take everything out of the refrigerator or the freezer, put the wheels under it, and then put everything back in the freezer or refrigerator. Let's talk about compressors for a minute. Probably the first thing that we bought while we were building our farmhouse here in Missouri was a compressor. And it was at Lowe's, and it was $500, $499.99 plus tax. And I liked it because it was black, and I liked that particular design of it. It had a cast iron pump, and I had 10% off, and then it was $50 off. And by the time I was done with all the discounts, it was great. It came out to $350 plus tax. And we've been using this 60-gallon compressor since 2005, every day. Every day. We use it for our nail guns. We use it for the tires. We use it for our tire changing machine. We use it for the air tools that we have. And there's one other thing that we use it for. Now, if you're gonna buy a compressor and you want it to last, I suggest you don't buy an airless one. They're noisy and they don't last as long as the ones with the oil reservoir, or the ones that look like an air-cooled lawnmower engine. And what they do is they have this lubricating oil in the oil pan, if you will, or the sump, and oil splashed around to lubricate and cool the compressor. Because when you compress air, it generates a lot of heat. Even though there's no fuel in it, it generates heat. And it will last longer if you have one that's an oiled one rather than an oil-less. So what we have is a 60-gallon vertical compressor with a cast iron pump, or cast iron cylinder, if you will. And it's really nice. It's not made in this country, but it's really nice. And it just runs and runs and runs. And one of the things that we use the compressor for is to blow out the air filters in our heating system. Built the house in 2005. And it has all the original furnace filters. Not one has been replaced. Not one. So here's what we do. We will start out with the original filter, and we like the fluffy kind, not the high-performance ones. We like the ones that you can almost see through, not these 3M type. And what we do is we start out and we spray N-Dust, E-N-D-U-S-T. It creates a static charge on the air filter, and dust is attracted to it like a magnet. So it seems to me that it does such a good job, not probably quite as good as those 3M filters that are, $15 a piece. I'm talking about we have like the $1 filters. We spray the N-Dust on them and then leave them outside for, 5 or 10 minutes in the sun. The sun volatilizes the scent, the lemon scent and the chemicals smell. And then we put them in. Now all the filters get marked with the direction of the airflow with a Sharpie marker. So we put an arrow on it and we say, this is the way the air is going to flow. And we always put it back the same way. And we put the same filter back in the same filter housing. And so they're all marked. And we'll take them out when they're dusty, every month or so, or every 2 months. We'll put one of those respirators on, or a filter mask, take the compressor, and we will blow air the opposite direction that it normally flows through the filter. And we do it where, we know which direction the wind is blowing, and we make sure that all the dust blows away from us. So we blow out the air filter. The dust leaves. Then we stack those air filters one on top of the next, on top of the next, and then we spray N-Dust on them. And the reason we stack them is we don't want to waste any N-Dust. So instead of having the N-Dust go right through the filter into the air, it goes into the filter below that, and the filter below that, and the filter below that, because they're stacked up. And then we make sure that they're all coated with end dust, just a light coating. Let the chemicals volatilize, and then we put them back. We have been able to get 13 years out of our air filters, and they're still going strong. Probably get another 13 years out of them. Everyone all set? Cocked, locked. Hour number 2 of USA Prepares. Kyle Harris is kind enough to join us today. No notice whatsoever. During the first hour, I asked Mrs. Finelli if she would call Kyle Harris and see if he was available to broadcast with us, and he said, sure. So thank you so much for being with us, Kyle.
It is my pleasure, Vince. It's kind of like getting on a wild camel without a saddle, so it works out all right.
Kyle, I've been doing some research, and I got to tell you that I don't give up on almost. I can't say as I give up. I've had some courses in school, and some of my classmates would say, "This is just brutal. I'm gonna drop this class or this course," so they wouldn't get a low grade. They wanted to get all A's, and I would just tough it out. To my own detriment, I would tough it out in terms of grades because I might get a C in a class that I probably should get a better grade in. Well, I got to tell you, I've been working on a Ford, and a 2003 Ford, and this thing is miserable. It had a computer problem. So the main computer, which is the engine control computer, and it's like the computer in this little Ford Escape V6. So I replaced the computer, and then you have to program the keys, and so I did all that, and then, it's not quite that, and I checked the fuel pressure, but in order to get to the fuel pressure, the little Schrader valve is under the intake manifold, really hard to get to. So you take parts off so you can test the fuel pump and fuel pressure, and that darn thing, leaks down, so I put a new fuel pump in it. Okay, good. And then it still won't really run properly, so maybe it's the throttle position sensor, so I cleaned that, drilled a little hole in it, sprayed a little tiny hole the size of a paperclip, and sprayed some electrical cleaner in there. That's not the problem. And then it could be the crank position sensor. It could be the cam position sensor. The list goes on and on and on. And if you try with even a sophisticated meter to figure out what the problem is, it's really tough because it doesn't show any codes. It doesn't show any pending codes or any actual codes. And so I went to YouTube and I went to the internet and I'm looking and everybody's saying the same thing. Man, what is it with these? The engine cranks, but it won't start. Engine cranks, but won't start. No one really has a good answer on this particular Ford Escape. It's absolutely miserable. Is it a ground connection somewhere? Is it a low battery condition? The choices are almost endless. And I am almost at the point where I say, let's take the parts off this. Let's sell the good parts that we know work, and then let's crush this piece of junk. And in Men in Black, there was a line that said, "You're driving a Ford POS?" Well, I got to tell you, that's accurate.
Yeah. It's you remind me of a story. I had a friend of mine who still owns an automotive repair shop, and he was one time I walked into his shop because I just go visit him every once in a while, and he's underneath a Ford Bronco, and he's beating on something, and it's bang, bang, bang. He's going at it, and he said, "You know what I'm going to call success?" And bang, bang, and he says, "When I tell everybody that walks through that door, I only work on GM."
It's interesting you say that. I really thought that there were, competitive models with equivalent construction. It's not true. It is absolutely not true. You get in a Ford truck and you go, who approved the thinning of the padding on these seats to the point where the seats are about as comfortable as a layer of paint? Seriously, the Ford seats are thin. If you look at the trucks, Ford has the worst seats, as far as I can tell. Chevrolet has the best seats. So, don't take my word for it. If you're out and about and you're test driving new vehicles, make sure you look at the seat, because you're going to be spending all of the time in that seat. Unless you have a Ford, then you're going to be spending most of your time under the hood.
Yeah.
I got to tell you, Kyle, it's terrible. In order to change, this thing is a V6, this particular 3-liter 2003 Ford Escape. It's a V6, and to get to the first 3 spark plugs, it's really easy. They're right up front. All you do is you take out these coil-on plug packs, and they're like the size of a medicine pill bottle, okay, with a wiring connector on them, 2 wires, and you take out a small bolt or a nut, and they just pop right off. It's great. Then you can get to the spark plugs, 3 of them. The other 3 are underneath this plastic intake manifold, which you have to take off a bunch of parts. You've got to take off the throttle cable. You've got to take off a bunch of hoses. You've got to move everything out of the way. And then you take off the intake manifold, of which you need new gaskets for, and then you can get to the rear 3 plugs. Now, spark plugs are a commonly replaced part. And on this Ford, you can't see the spark plugs without taking the intake manifold off. It's ridiculous.
Yep. The only exception to the rule, as far as I'm concerned, with Ford vehicles, is when they had the 7.3 liter diesel, because that was an international motor and extremely well built. Ford did make it more complicated, but still to this day, one of the most sought after Ford trucks that you can get is back when they had the 6-speed manual transmission hooked up to that 7.3 International Harvester diesel, because they rode good because of the extra weight in them, and everybody wanted them. I had a friend of mine who is a Ford nut. He's got plenty of money to keep them in the shop if he needs to, so that works out all right for him. But anyway, he found one and just absolutely loves it and runs it till it's got 450,000 miles on it. But so that's the exception to the rule. But their gas engines, as a rule, I mean, they've got a lot of horsepower out of them in the latest years. But man, does Ford make things just absolutely miserable to work on. I just can't. I won't own one because I can't. I don't want to. I guess the accurate way of putting it is I don't want to spend all the extra time it takes to be able to own a Ford and work on it myself. So that's why I won't even own one.
I totally agree with you, and I keep telling my son, "Wow, this is absolutely terrible." And if you look at the sheet metal class, all you have to do is just kind of take your knuckle and kind of tap on the sheet metal. You won't believe how thin it is. You say, "Wow, if they're ever in an accident, it will destroy the vehicle in terms of it will cost so much to fix it that you'll have to get another vehicle." Like if you hit a deer, or if you bump into a truck that has a trailer hitch, sticking out the back, it will destroy the vehicle. Something as simple as that. I was looking at the campfire images on the internet, and I was looking at these vehicles, and the vehicles have been burned. Vehicles were trying to drive down the road. The road was on fire. The bumpers are melting. The bumpers. Now, it's not the bumpers that are melting. It's the plastic coating and the styrofoam underneath the plastic coating that looks like it's supposed to be a bumper. That's not the bumper. But that plastic that's on the front and back of most vehicles catches on fire. Catches on fire. Now, can you imagine driving through a road that has fire on both sides, and your vehicle starts melting? The lights start melting, the front and back lights. Well, in the 90s, I was driving through a wildfires on the interstate with the family, in our vehicle. It was a van with plastic bumpers. It happened to be a Ford. I didn't know better back then. And we were driving through this wildfire and on the interstate, and the people behind me were going 70 miles an hour, and we go right into zero visibility. Zero. And if I stopped, the people behind me would kill us by crashing into us. Going forward, I couldn't see where I was going. It was pretty terrifying, to say the least, to have the children in the car back then. Mrs. Finelli and the children. And being in a plastic car with a gasoline-powered car. I'd much rather be in a diesel under those circumstances. But,
Absolutely.
You think, is it possible that the road could be on fire? Well, it was. And if you saw the pictures of these vehicles in California, you will see puddles of aluminum and magnesium where the wheels once were, because the wheels melted into a puddle. Aluminum and magnesium wheels, I kid you not. The tires burned off, and you'd see a little pile of black stuff that used to be the tires, and you'll see these little wires that used to be the reinforcement steel wires where the bead of the tire was. That's all that's left. So the aluminum magnesium wheels would melt. The aluminum radiator would melt. The plastic gas tank would burn and the gas would explode. Pretty dangerous stuff, if you ask me. And that's how we're making cars today. Any comments, Kyle?
It is. Well, it's been a downhill slide for a long time. Back, my own personal opinion is they went away from carbureted cars because guys were figuring out how to get 200 miles to the gallon out of them. And my personal opinion is that there's ways to still do that where you can, too many guys have disappeared that come up with these inventions on vapor carburetors and different things, So we'll pick up on the other side of the break.
Yeah. The only problem is if you have a plastic intake manifold and you want to superheat your air-fuel mixture, you can't really superheat it without melting the intake manifold. So Detroit has fixed that. So it's difficult to achieve. Kyle Harris is with us today. And we're talking about Fords and how difficult they are to work on, and how I am just at the edge of saying, I can't stand this thing anymore. Let's dump it. Let's sell the parts that are useful on the internet, Craigslist maybe, and dump it. Now, if you look at this thing, it looks great. It looks wonderful. You say, wow, that's a really neat little vehicle, but it's impossible to work on. And we're talking about miles per gallon and how people have disappeared who have come up with inventions to improve the fuel economy of vehicles. And that was back when they had carburetors. But now we don't have carburetors on vehicles, and it's very difficult to get inside the computer of these new vehicles and rewrite the code or modify them. Because when you had carburetors, you could change the jets, you could change the spark timing, you could degree the cam, you could increase the compression, you could mill the heads, you could port and polish the intake and exhaust manifold. You could make a lot of changes to improve the Detroit manufactured engines. But not today. You can't. There's no porting and polishing that you can really accomplish with a plastic manifold, because if you were to increase the size of it, there's not enough size, not enough material to remove to make it better, because it's so thin and it's made out of plastic.
Yep.
Kyle, you were talking about improving fuel economy.
Well, sure. Well, excuse me. Even a simple invention. When I was in high school, I was dating a girl who I met her uncle, and he owned a oil filter factory. And so anyway, I was talking to my girlfriend at the time about that, and she said, yeah, he made an invention that goes in a carburetor that was causing this Dodge Polara station wagon, which is the closest thing to a land yacht you can get. Okay, they're huge, long, and it had a great big engine. I don't remember the size of it right now. But anyway, this thing looked like a tiny little Christmas tree, and it fit down into the carburetor, and the gasoline would hit it, and it would flare out, for lack of a better term. It would atomize the gas way excellent. And then he would change the jetting on the carburetor so that it didn't need as much gas. And he was getting 40, if I remember correctly, it was like 46 miles to the gallon. And how they bought his invention off of him by giving him a oil filter producing factory, so he had a constant income for the rest of his life, and so did his kids. And he sold them that and never heard of it. You'll never hear of it or see it or anything like that ever again, you know. But there was ways to do
when I was when I was racing cars, we were experimenting with all kinds of things like that. So, for example, there was a way that you could just take a screen, and a copper screen or an aluminum screen, I'm talking about that you would have on a window, and you could make it into the shape of, let's say, a thimble, but a large thimble, and put that under each barrel of a 4-barrel carburetor in the intake manifold. You want to make sure that the engine didn't eat the screen. But if you could do that, what would happen is the droplets of gas mixing with the air right underneath the carburetor would hit the screen and splatter and mix with more air than it would without that. So that's very similar to what you're talking about with this Christmas tree device, right?
Sure, you bet. Yep.
And it worked.
Anyway, you bet.
And how much did it cost? How much did it cost? It was free, because there's plenty of window screens back then that you could find, plenty of them. And you could even find copper ones. Yes. Yeah. Yes. There was a company that made a device that I found in one of the catalogs. It could have been a J.C. Whitney catalog. And it was like a propeller. And it would attach to the intake manifold gasket to the carburetor. That gasket right under the carburetor. And this propeller would spin just from the air flowing from each barrel of the carburetor into the intake manifold, and it would spin like a propeller in an airplane. And it would chop through the gasoline droplets coming out of the carburetor and further atomize and increase mileage as well. Kyle Harris is with us. So, Kyle, we're working on this POS, and my son said, "Hey, Dad, I found on the internet this Ford Escape just like the one that you're working on. And it's got, everything works." This guy says everything works except the rear end fell off it. And I said, "Really?" The rear end fell off. So I did some research, and here's what's happening. So during Hurricane Sandy, there was a lot of flooding in the East Coast, saltwater flooding. And there were vehicles that were submerged, up to the door handles in salt water. So the salt got under the seats, the salt got in the engine, the starter. And so there's a insurance company called USAA, and they sell insurance. And I don't like USAA. I actually went head to head with them in Virginia. They're a miserable outfit, and I can go into detail at some other time, but they're a horrible, horrible company. Come get me, USAA, for telling this story. I'd love to bring it to light. So what USAA was caught doing is, when they have these flood vehicles, they can't sell them as a vehicle that can be put on the road because parts will fall off. Now, I'm talking about the rear end fell off this vehicle because it rusted on the unibody, where the rear suspension components attached to the unibody of this these particular vehicles. The Ford Escape is what I'm talking about. And the rust, you can't stop it. You cannot stop this kind of rust. And so the rear end fell off. So this guy was selling this vehicle for parts. Okay, so how does that happen? Now, the only way I can think that would happen is salt from the roads or salt from a vehicle that's been flooded. Well, USAA has been caught selling vehicles that have been submerged in salt water at auctions. And the title, well, they lost the title, they lost, and so now these vehicles are being sold and people are buying them are having serious problems. If your vehicle is a flood vehicle and it's salt water, you cannot fix it. Well, Kyle, you worked at a dealership. Am I saying anything that's not true?
No, it's you'll chase electrical problems and mechanical problems and rust problems, and it's like you said, there was only, and you have to apply it before it was submerged. There is only one product that I have ever come across. Well, two. One was better than the other, but still both worked. It used to be that Rust-Oleum, the paint that they sold. They had a paint that had a fish oil primer when they first came out. That would, if you got that on there before rust started, it would really protect it. But the other stuff that when I used to live in Alaska years and years ago, there was a company called End Rust. And it sprayed this kind of a waxy, oily, clear, filmy stuff underneath your vehicle, and it was the same stuff that they would spray on the oil rigs before they would put them in the ocean for ocean-mounted oil rigs that would have stuff down in the salt water, and it would protect it. But I haven't seen End Rust anymore. I don't. My relatives that live up there say they're not around anymore. But up in Alaska, they use a lot of calcium chloride and salt on the road. It's really bad, hard on you. And I had an old 66 Chevy pickup at the time that I wanted protected. And I had that old boy spray that underneath there, and I drove that truck for years in that salt and corrosion and stuff, and it never rusted out whatsoever any. It was the best investment I ever made, but, of course they don't want vehicles to last like that anymore, so that's probably why it's gone.
You know what I don't hear anymore, or see anymore, or read about anymore? Maybe I'm not traveling in the right circles, but there used to be a company called Z-Bart. And Z-Bart was a rust-proofing company, and if you bought a vehicle and you wanted to keep it for a long time, you could bring it to a Z-Bart dealer, and they drill holes in the rocker panels and in the, where you couldn't see it, and they put plugs in. They would spray this tar-like substance, a waxy tar substance. Mm-hmm. Quaker State had a product. It was brown in color. They would do the same thing. And for about $180, $200, maybe $250, depending on the size of the vehicle, you could have your vehicle rust-proofed. I don't even hear of rust-proofing vehicles anymore.
No, I haven't either. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And they used to have special tools. They would have a pump with probably air-powered pump, and they would put this liquid, gooey, waxy, tarry kind of substance in a spray bottle with a long wand, and the wand would go into these cavities that were drilled. So they'd maybe drill a 3/8 of an inch hole in certain places in the car, and they'd spray the inside of the fenders, the inside of the underside of the vehicle, where it would rust. And it was great. And they used to have a lifetime guarantee. If you had your vehicle sprayed with one of these products, they would guarantee your vehicle for life against rust if you brought it back once a year for an inspection. And that seems kind of reasonable.
Sure.
But it worked. But no more. And so I've got a Chevrolet pickup truck. If you look at the interior, it's fine. Just about all of it works. The running gear works. I can work on it. It's fixable. But the rocker panels of the 2004 and that particular body style, everyone who has one around here, rocker panels are rusting or rusted through. Mine are gone. Mine have just fallen off from the rust. But this vehicle still goes forward, backward, up hills, downhill, and it's still a work truck. It's as a matter of fact, I think people feel sorry for me. Driving my rust-colored truck, and that poor guy.
Well, you won't get mugged. That's a good thing,
Yeah. I just love it.
One time, a friend of mine said about concrete. He says, I can tell you because that's what he did for a living. He said, I can tell you two things about concrete. He said, number one is that it cracks regardless. And number two, nobody's going to steal it.
Yeah, concrete comes with a guarantee, absolutely, and that is that it will crack. No matter what you do, you will have cracks. If you look in your basement floor, if you look in your garage floor, if you look at the pads, no matter where it is, it absolutely will crack. Kyle, I want to share something with you. I'm not going to be breaking the story because the story came out before, but I don't think it came out enough, and here it is. So let me just read a couple paragraphs. No, they're short. Now, class, please pay attention to what I'm saying because this may affect you. It's from ProPublica.org. Okay. In October 2005, the Callises began paying a $180,000 mortgage on a home they built on a lot they purchased for $40,000. About a year after they move in, the hallmark signs of defective drywall began to appear. They suffered constricted breathing, headaches, and other health problems. Their dishwasher broke down, then the refrigerator. The air conditioner failed soon after its coils corroded. A bunch of jewelry kept turning black. I kept cleaning it, and it kept turning black. I lost 3 TVs. My computer crashed, and I bought a new one, and that one crashed too, Catherine Callis said. When a relative called in December 2008, asked if the Callises had heard about Chinese drywall problem, the family became even more confused. John Callis immediately climbed into the attic to see if he could find any Chinese trademarks on their drywall. Instead, he found markings for National Gypsum and U.S. Gypsum. Here's what happened. Test results confirm the presence of the effect of sulfide gases in the presence of drywall releasing these gases. Now, this is a really big, really serious, really expensive problem. So if you go to Wikipedia, they'll say that Chinese drywall refers to an environmental health issue involving defective drywall manufactured in China, imported to the United States, and used in residential construction between 2001 and 2009, affecting an estimated 100,000 homes in more than 20 states. So what happens is these chemicals leave as gases or cause gases to come out of the drywall. Hydrogen sulfide, that's that rotten egg smell. If you've been behind a vehicle climbing a hill and you go, gosh, what is that smell? It smells like rotten eggs. Well, that's that is the hydrogen sulfide gas that we're talking about. It smells like rotten eggs. And so with this drywall, this defective drywall, which was made with, I believe, industrial waste, the gases that come out of it corrode copper pipes, corrode electrical wiring, corrode air conditioning coils, which are either aluminum or copper. They corrode or they turn silver, like if you have a silver set, silver tea set, silver jewelry, it turns black. Okay. It causes respiratory problems such as asthma attacks, chronic coughing, difficulty breathing, chronic headaches, and sinus problems. What happened was during 2004 or 2005, there were like 9 hurricanes in the United States. And because of this massive destruction, there was a rebuilding effort, which required sheetrock. We didn't have enough. So companies started importing sheetrock into the United States from China. And it contained hazardous chemicals. And people are getting sick. Who do you know that has a family that doesn't have a respiratory problem right now? Name one. Name one. We'll come back and talk a little bit more about this with Kyle. This is serious. We'll be right back. And according to Wikipedia, in April 2009, home improvement stores, the Home Depot and Lowe's, confirmed from their suppliers that no drywall sold in their stores was imported from China. However, Lowe's did eventually settle a lawsuit by offering up to $100,000 for each effective home, but denied selling Chinese drywall. So here's where Kyle Harris comes in as an electrician. Kyle, the telltale evidence of Chinese drywall could be as simple as taking a cover plate off a electrical switch or receptacle and looking at the bare copper wire. If it is black, it's entirely possible that the sheetrock in that house or that office building was this defective, toxic, dangerous, killer drywall. Have you ever noticed that some ground wires in electrical outlets that have been wired during that period, let's say from 2005 to, let's say, 2009, have you seen any evidence in your experience of this, these gases affecting the copper wires?
One house in particular comes to mind that I opened up, and every single outlet that I went into there, we were tracing problems, and we finally narrowed it down to a ground again. It's amazing how often that happens, but almost every single one of those wires were black. I was going to mention to you, that even I used to weld on a high-pressure gas line down in Wyoming for a while, and gas plant, and they would take this sour gas out of the ground, and it was this same hydrogen sulfide gas, and they would of course treat it, and then it'd be natural gas when they got all done, and they would add that rotten egg smell that it came with naturally right out of the ground kind of back into it. But we were told there was 2,500 people on this job site. It was huge. But we were told that the sirens ever sounded, that meant that there had been a gas leak, and it was higher than 20 parts per million. And so we were to leave immediately if it got over 20 parts per million. So that stuff is dangerous, and people think, I got to jump to one thing before the end of the program, Vince. People think that, these defective Chinese products are kind of, specifically selling just junk to America. But the truth of the matter is they sell that to their own people. There was a friend of mine who was a missionary in China and actually married a Chinese wife. And he told me, he said, you know why the rice in China is clumpy and white and sticky, and everybody eats it with chopsticks, and you just kind of shovel it into your mouth? And he said that because it contains little tiny particles of steel and glass, because the rice separating part of a factory might be right next to a machine shop, which might be right next to a glass manufacturing shop. And he says when they break stuff, they just kind of all shovel it out there and sweep it out to get it out of the way, and parts of it end up in the food. And so that's just their culture. So, look at what do they care? They don't have the same value of human life and a dignity of existence that we do. It just doesn't compute with a lot of those people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's a very good point. And you've seen these factories. You have seen the products that come out of them can look really nice. They can be painted. They can have a nice finish. But if you saw the photographs of the factories that make them, they're disgusting. There's junk everywhere. Exactly what Kyle's talking about. And around our neck of the woods, we started getting a lot of flat tires around here. And the Amish are in the construction trades. And they don't seem to care about nails because their buggies have steel-rimmed wheels. They don't get flats. And they don't care about the nails as much as we do. No kidding. Kind of like what you're talking about, Kyle. It's absolutely true.
You bet.
Yeah. Kyle, thanks so much for being with us today. Class, above all, honesty and integrity. What happens next is up to you.